Right. So thank you very much, everyone, for being here and so patient today. It's really a complicated day. I'm here with Roger Johnston and Dan from Axial 3D. Thank you very much for accepting to share your knowledge and your experience in the 3D printing space, and most importantly in a very exciting space, which is the 3D for medicine. I'm thrilled to learn more. Thank you for those who have joined the session. This is TiiQuTalks. We love highlighting skills that matter and can change the world for the better. The all-around idea of TiiQuTalks is fostering knowledge sharing and potentially create new knowledge with skills that matter. And Roger and Dan today are right here for this. Thank you again, Roger and Dan. I would say that I leave the stage to you. Who wanted to start telling us a little bit more of what you are doing, what you are up to, and what is the 3D space, the 3D printing space?
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Laura, for this fantastic opportunity. We're excited to have a little bit of fun and share what we know, and of course go in any direction that anyone would like to for the time we have. A little bit of background to who we are. We'll try not to make this too much of an advertorial. Rather, we will focus on actually trying to understand the dynamics of the market, understand trends, and maybe give some of the audience food for thought as to what might be possible in their context. So to introduce ourselves, my name is Roger Johnston. I'm CEO of Axial 3D. My partner on the call, Dan Crawford, is our founder and Chief Strategy Officer. The business is 5 years old. We are the first company in the world to automatically turn 2D medical images, so MRI and CT scans, into incredibly precise 3D images. And those 3D images could be printed out. They could be consumed in a workflow application that maybe is creating a patient-specific implant, or indeed they could be ingested into AR, VR application that is manipulating or viewing or allowing certain physician teams to get a different experience of the surgery planning or whatever part of the augmentation of the care pathway. We have a very simple but very grand ambition in life. Our view, and you'll hear as we go along, Dan is the brains behind the outfit. I'm the marketing or business guy behind in our partnership. But our aim is a simple one. It's predicated on looking back on history. If we look at television and the adoption of color TV taking over from black and white TV. So black and white TV, if we analogize that to 2D medical imaging, has been around for a long time. It provides a level of functionality. Obviously, if I'm watching snooker or 9-ball pool, depending what part of the world you're in, on a black and white TV, it was a bit of a tough experience, but you could get the idea of what was going on. And that's, if I'm slightly cruel, not unlike what happens with medical 3D imaging. Many patient surgeries, medical 2D imaging is absolutely good enough. The surgeon maybe looks at it just to confirm, but they know the answer before they've even started maybe examining the patient. However, for the most complicated surgeries, the 2D imaging is insufficient to meet surgeons' needs. So if I use that if I parallelize back with the TV analogy, at some stage, a clever company invented color TV. That color TV was incredibly expensive. It had a total step change in functionality, whether it was in terms of the resolution or the fact it was color, or indeed as we moved over time, the augmented capability of that TV. So it was no longer just a small viewing device that was maybe 20 inches by 10 inches. It could now be 60 inches by 40 inches. It could have internet connection. It could have surround sound. It could have high definition. All of these incredible experiences. But it was a niche product. A niche is defined by price, by availability, and by scalability. So at some stage, for those of us who are old enough to remember, I hope there aren't too many people don't remember black and white TV, but at some stage during its journey, the TV, the Currys or Dixons of this world had as many color TVs as they had black and white TVs. The price point was the same, and the experience was just a different world apart. And at that stage, black and white TV became redundant. It just disappeared. Our view is that there will be no cases where 3D medical imaging is not better for any surgical procedure than 2D medical imaging. There will be plenty of cases until you get to that point where price, availability, and accessibility are on a par, where 2D will be good enough. And 2D, of course, is the most common, is much more common than 3D today. But at some stage, and maybe it's 5 or 7 years away, 3D will be as acceptable at the same price point, and 2D imaging as an output factor, it's our contention, will disappear. So to wrap this in the context of Axial 3D, and then I'll pass back to you, Laura, our aim is to democratize 3D. That requires us to be the catalytic company to make it at a price point available, that it's not just the purveyors of patients in Beverly Hills who can afford to pay for it. It's available whether you're in the first world or third world. Anywhere where you have access to 2D medical imaging as the capture, we will create 3D, incredibly precise, segmented 3D at a price point you can afford it. It will be accessible and available. We use the AWS cloud platform, which exists in every major region around the world. It is the most ubiquitous cloud platform. So whether it be in terms of distribution, whether it be in terms of making sure that the medical data that gets manipulated and transformed in our platform is managed within your region, so your medical data is never leaving. If you're in Germany, the data never leaves Germany. If you're in Australia, your medical data never leaves Germany. We believe we've cracked, or in the journey to cracking, this price, accessibility, availability paradigm. So Laura, let me stop speaking at this stage and maybe move past the advertorial, and we can hopefully start sharing some of our insight.
Thank you very much, Roger. I'd like, well, before starting questions, did Dan wanted to add anything on the side of what you are doing and where you are in your journey or whatever?
Yeah, no, look, I can add a little bit to what Roger was saying, and I think his paradigm or his comparison there to color TV is a very good one. I think over the last 5 years, we've really seen a resurgence in 3D printing generally, and especially medical 3D printing being adopted globally. And that's really allowed us as a company to grow really, really quickly. And really, like, what that has resulted from is a number of these technologies that have been around for nearly 30 years. Actually, what a lot of people don't know is 3D printing was actually invented back in 1984 by Chuck Hull, and it's been around for the elite aeronautical engineering, mechanical engineering space now for nearly 30 years. But really back in 2012, 2013, when a lot of the patents for these technologies started to run out, it started to allow a lot of more cost-effective technologies at the same accuracy to actually come into the market, which has allowed more and more of these companies to start adopting 3D printing at scale, which has been phenomenal for the whole medical 3D printing community as a whole, but I think for the whole rapid prototyping community globally for every different use case. So it's a really exciting time to be involved in 3D printing at this really key inflection point in its second resurgence into the market.
Let me understand that, because you have gone very quickly, and I'm not necessarily so well informed about 3D, and I'm reading about prototyping with a 3D printer, and that's okay, I get it. But I also see about the ability, well, to replace organs and or the ability for patients to go online in a drugstore online with a kind of digital prescription and buy the blueprint of the chemical ink needed and then print the drug at home. So is that possible? If it is possible, how is it possible? And which are the limits that at the moment you see in this process, if any?
So I think what you're describing and so with some exciting anecdotes is illustrating what is potential in this market. We are right at the start of a journey here. So what we might consider leading edge or innovative or starting to break ground is really at the pinprick of where medical 3D printing will go to over the next 5 and 10 years. The core theme I would encourage all those watching or listening today to think about is what patient or what 3D printing unlocks is the concept of patient specific. So if you imagine, if we use it in terms of whether it be a implant or a guide for performing a procedure, or for surgeons practicing before a complex neurosurgery or cardiovascular surgery, instead of practicing on a example of a patient, why wouldn't I want to practice a clot removal on Dan's actual clot using a copy of Dan's actual arterial system that's relevant for that clot? If I'm putting an implant in my hip, why wouldn't I want to use a Dan perfect copy of his existing hip as opposed to a size 10 off the shelf? So this journey towards patient specific is what 3D printing unlocks. And then where you started to go, which is also an incredibly exciting dimension that we can drill into more, is what are the materials that we're printing with? So this industry started, if I look at different types of it, maybe with joint replacements with titanium, with maybe some cutting guides, it's with a resin. With surgical planning models, it's a resin. That resin could be, in my technical way, really solid if I'm an orthopedic surgeon, because I have a season ticket membership of Black & Decker. I like getting my saw out and my drill out, and I want a haptic sense that this simulation model is akin to a bone model. If I'm a surgeon, I like a much softer model, something that's akin to the texture of a heart that when I put my hand on it. However, this is starting the journey because, as you correctly say, Laura, printing organs, printing other parts of the anatomy that are going to be used and are simulating the anatomy, as opposed to in the way that I can have a functioning organ such as a heart. That's a really exciting step. Now, printing tissue. If we look across lots of other markets outside of healthcare, the number of materials that are being used to 3D print are incredible. We always joke about a particular use case, which is you can 3D print candy or sweets. The question that comes up is, but why would you want to? Because Cadbury's or whoever else, they've got a fantastic process that makes really tasty sweets. So I think that's always a slight caveat with this. But again, not only in terms of the printer technology, but the materials technology, we are right at the start of the journey of what's possible. And a lot of the use cases you're touching on there are very much, they're not Star Trek in terms of the future time away. They're a matter of a small number of years.
That's interesting. I've got another question from the audience. Can we talk about 3D printing in combination with the gene-based innovation for wound healing and regeneration, reprinting human parts. I think you already answered, but if you wanted to add anything, please do that.
Yeah, Laura,
so I do
expand a little bit more on what Roger was talking about there, just in relation to that specific question. So I think Roger's analogy where he's talking about patient-specific medicine, that's exactly what we do as a company. Our goal is to make patient-specific medicine completely routine. And where we can form patient-specific organs, we can take things like kidneys and make sure that we have the right form factor and the right size to go into a very, very specific person. Where we're seeing a lot of new innovation in this market is in materials. So materials where you can use the same 3D printing technology that already exists, FDM, SLA, SLS technology, but start to seed those materials with suspensions or polymers that you can then seed with human tissue. So it's really merging the two markets of gene therapy and 3D printing. So you're 3D printing scaffolds that you can seed with things like mesenchymal stem cells to start look at growing very, very specific structures in very, very specific shapes that you can then start to implant in humans. So we've already seen the first patient-specific human implant in Anthony Atala's lab. Actually, I think it was back in 2012, where they'd actually 3D printed and put a bladder of a patient-specific bladder into a patient. So they were able to take the scan of that bladder, remove it, print a scaffold of the bladder, and then stem the same bladder for that patient with the mesenchymal stem cells, grow the bladder and put it back into the patient. So that's really the first iteration of this market. So, you know, I think Roger's completely right. It's not Star Trek space age. It's really something that we'll start to see over the next 3 to 5 years, more and more of these applications starting to come into the market and start to actually be a thing that you'll see more and more in publications.
Are you saying that we can potentially come to a point where a human being can be refabricated?
Yes,
what I perceive is that basically we are a bunch of pieces with some connections, and we can achieve a perfect connection of all of that in 35 years.
Completely, Laura. We're definitely
really?
on, and
personally, I was joking.
No, and we're definitely on that journey. The market at the moment, if you kind of extract all the anatomies in the body, you go from hard tissues to soft tissues. We're already seeing that when you're extracting all those pieces of anatomy, when you look at hard tissues, there are patient-specific scaffolds for the spine, there are custom knee replacements, custom hip replacements that are already out there in the market. And back to that example I was giving you, and Anthony Atala's bladder, we're starting to see more and more of the soft tissue applications actually start to be introduced into healthcare. So it's not completely infeasible that in 10 to 15 years time we can start to regenerate sort of whole portions of bodies rather than just small parts.
So Laura, I think just the caveat, whole portions of bodies, probably not whole bodies. So I think
right.
that would be the
That's good. So we keep something of the human being. I've got another question by who is asking, we should be able to replace joints first. I hope all the spinal injuries, knee, etc., and the injuries and deep ones. So that's, my question to you is more about sustainability and how our bodies will react. Because at the moment, you are working on stuff outside, right? So what will happen when these fantastic refabricated pieces will be together into our body?
Yeah, so Laura, like I can take that one as well. And really this goes back to the materials properties. What we're seeing more and more in research is that there are materials that again are being fed into these 3D printers that already exist that are starting to mimic human tissue. So if we go back to the orthopedic implant, and I think that there's a question on spinal injuries and knees. What we're seeing large orthopedic medical device companies starting to do is adopt technologies that are, so they're laser beam melting technologies that you can 3D print these full joints in. And those full joints are printed in metallic structures that actually osteointegrate, so they grow into the bone because they mimic the material properties of our own bones. And if you look further into the future and where the research is today, they're starting to look at things like hydroxyapatite scaffolds and seeding metallic implants with things like coral that is 3D printed, that has far better osteointegration or compatibility with the body. So again, it all boils down to the materials and how compatible they are with the human body.
So can we say that 3D printing as an industry relies entirely or approximately entirely on A, materials, and B, the printers that should fit the use case? Of course, printing a house is different from printing some kind of part of our body. Do you see the potential of a home-based printer for everyone to print whatever we want?
Yeah, totally agree with you, Laura. And I would add one other thing to your two steps there. So there's the machine itself, there's the materials, but one of the most important things that a lot of customers don't think about is the technology to drive the printer. So you need the right CAD software, you need the right inputs to these printers to make the outputs useful. And what we're seeing more of is technologies that make it easier and easier for people that are not as savvy in CAD design and the three-dimensional world, to make it easier for them to start adopting the technology at scale. And for us in Axial 3D, what that means is we make it easier for surgeons and clinicians to take traditional two-dimensional medical images like CT and MRIs and convert those into the 3D files that can then be ingested into the 3D printer. And in the home world that you're talking about, Laura, we're seeing things like Thingiverse and these other open source technologies that are making it easier for the person at home to start accessing the technology. And one of the examples I have actually of me using a 3D printer in my own house is, which I have downstairs, is a little piece of my kitchen broke. It was a soft closed door. And instead of me having to go off and order that part to fix that piece of my kitchen, I was able to go online and download the file and 3D print it in my own house and replace that part in a few hours, as opposed to having to go through lots of customer services departments to get a little tiny part. So I think more and more people will start to actually bring the technology in-house.
So let me rephrase. I love coffee. I drink a lot of coffee, and I use the Nespresso machine. So basically, I bought the Nespresso, and then I buy the little dosette everywhere. And Nespresso made it possible to distribute these little things with the different flavors and whatever. That's what is going to happen with the printer. I buy a printer and then I go online and I buy the template of whatever I want.
So Laura, I think
in the future is about producing stuff as a 3D printer producer, or providing people with, let's say, the pieces for doing whatever they want.
So I think we've already seen this movie as well, which is good. I think whether it be in computing or even in 2D printing, in printing on a piece of paper, if I look at the mainframe computing industry, I'm old enough to have started my computing journey with mainframe computing, when in fact we put punch card tickets into the mainframe, and that was used to generate the code. And then we went through mini computers, and then we got to desktop, and now we have all of our mobile devices. I now can develop better applications, and I'm a terrible programmer, using my mobile application software than I could when I was an expert printer in 1986, or sorry, an expert programmer. And I think the commoditization of IT computing, we will go on exactly the same journey and are on that journey with 3D printing. So if I look at the last generation from HP and Stratasys and these amazing 3D printing companies, they have the mainframe, their predominant success is in the mainframe computing of 3D printers. The printer costs $500,000. It needs to be in a air-conditioned print room, a clean air room. Where now we're moving to desktop technology, and maybe what Dan's referring to is the likes of Ultimaker or Formlabs, where the printer costs a couple of $1,000s. It's almost at the point where I could use that printer. It's not quite there yet, Laura. So it hasn't yet reached the Apple version of 3D printing. I'm still a dad dancer of 3D printing as a user, but we're within a half cycle, maybe 18, 24 months of where even I can use that 3D printer, and it is your Nespresso machine of 3D printing. And we will buy, whether it be applications like Microsoft Office of 3D printing, that is a ubiquitous CAD application that allows me to do, whether it's to print figures from my favorite movie or little cars or more functioning applications. So this journey is the inevitable, but I would also restate Dan's point. A printer is not sufficient at a price point or availability. The applications are where we're going to see huge steps moving forward that will open up the accessibility of this to you and I.
Let me understand that in virtual reality and augmented reality, for saying in the space of emerging technologies, we have Facebook with their Oculus, which are basically shaping the industry, with all what is related to have a very, very strong stakeholder which possess data, etc. Do you see anything, so some kind of big actor that can be, let's just say, hiding others, or is a much more democratized industry?
So I do think it will be perhaps somewhat more democratized, in that I think the needs of the aeronautic or automobile or leisure are fundamentally different from medical. However, I think within those vertical markets, I do think we're going to see big guerrilla application or companies coming out. And whilst I'm not sure that they're necessarily dominating the market in the way that Xbox or Sony will dominate the gaming console market today, I think we're on that direction. So we certainly know, for example, where we think the dominant players in medical 3D imaging and printing will come from. It will be certainly include the leaders in 2D medical imaging. So some of GE Healthcare or Philips or Siemens will come out. I think the cloud platforms, because public cloud, especially with Microsoft Azure and AWS, they are democratizing an awful lot of software applications for users around the world. And I think that will apply heavily in medical 3D imaging.
I would argue what you call democratizing with when you talk about I don't know what you think. What is your perception about democratizing? Because I mean, AWS and any cloud service is not exactly what I call democratization. Well, it's making it accessible. Yes, democratizing is another topic.
Yeah, so I think, of course, it depends on what stakeholder view you're representing. Certainly, I'm talking about availability. And availability for me, if I can register on a website and from that, take my medical 2D images and create a 3D print. That for me is democratizing. Of course, there's a price element to that. A significant price point. It's got to be available at a price point outside of that's available in Beverly Hills. So I do agree with that. I think also but if you look at the barriers in medicine, in healthcare, to doing any change, our medical records, they don't sit in the cloud, they don't sit on your laptop, they don't sit on a USB in your house. They sit in a hospital, and your medical records are owned by the hospital. They're not owned by you. That is fundamentally wrong. That's an arcane view of medical records. And I do believe that with appropriate controls, the big cloud vendors will democratize that. They will put your medical images into the cloud, and it will be you who will control role-based access to workflows and subsets of that data. So your physio will be given access to these workflows and that subset of your medical record. Your orthopedic surgeon, a different one. Your primary care physician, your parents, your lawyer, all of the different stakeholders in your care as you journey through life will you will control access to your medical records and functionality.
Well,
and that is democratization, at least with one lens.
You mean that, yes, you will be able to share data with whom you want, not necessarily to really have a control over that.
Well, I think shared data and workflows. So I think functionality as well is important here. That doesn't mean, of course, the major hospitals and medical care centers around the world don't have a huge role in.
That's okay. It's just to call the things as they are.
Absolutely. So absolutely, when you go in for a trauma because you had a slight accident off your bike, and you should be able to take your medical 2D image and 3D print that because you want to show your kids. Absolutely.
That's interesting. So what is the connection, if you can talk about that? I don't know if it is your domain. The connection between virtual reality and 3D printing. Where is the link?
Yep.
If you can expand to any other use case, I understand that you are in the healthcare space, but if you see anything interesting in other spaces, that would be interesting.
So I'll give one view and maybe Dan has another. The core of this is the big transformation factor, or at least one of them is creating these incredibly precise and rich 3D data sets. That's the starting point. If I go back to just because we can print candy doesn't mean it's going to mainstream. And I think what we've seen with 3D printing and with virtual reality is an awful lot of applications, and people prove you can, I don't know, go to high school in virtual reality, but it doesn't mean that's ever going to mainstream. So what I think as we move from early adopter markets into early mainstream, is we will see that this content will be consumed, whether it's an application or into a form factor, which could be a print, or indeed an electronic file in a virtual reality headset, not just because I can look at it in a virtual reality headset because it's a cool thing to do, but because the application functionality allows me to fundamentally transform the output or the outcome of why I would want to do that. So I think what we'll find is the different applications, the different medical uses in this case, there'll be certain type of procedures will be best done in a VR headset. Some will be best done using a 3D print. Some for expediency. I'm rushing to treat a stroke patient. I'm a doctor and I'm driving with one hand on the wheel, my knee in the wheel, and I'm going to look at the stroke on my phone. I shouldn't, and don't quote me on that, but I'll consume it either because it's the best form factor or it's the expedient form factor. And I think so virtual reality, AR, will coexist and be bedfellows with 3D printing. They will just be different users, different scenarios will prefer a different form factor.
Well, you think, say there are a couple of questions about sustainability and the environmental impact of materials, basically. So if you can spend a couple of words on that. And then a second point that I would like to talk about is, okay, we have this fantastic tool. I'm a little bit perplexed about what you say about data management. I don't see it so really in the hands of individuals, but I also think that individuals don't really care very much at the moment. So probably it just goes in the direction that people want. But what I care about is any impact of new technologies on social inclusion. So on taking, for example, health everywhere. Do you think 3D, for the cost that it has and for the implication in terms of production, etc., can somehow change how things work in healthcare in Africa, for example?
Yeah, so Roger, how about I'll take sustainability and then I'll hand over to you on the other point. So yeah. Laura, on the sustainability piece, it's something that's coming up year after year, more and more now that 3D printing has started to have this reemergence. And the reason for it's pretty simple, that a lot of the printing technologies, about 95%, are printing plastics. So, we obviously don't want, a huge amount of these printers being introduced into lots and lots of different global specialisms and then creating lots of unnecessary plastic parts for the environment. Although what we are seeing is that more of the actual materials that are going into these printers are starting to be made from more sustainable materials. So let's say MakerBot or Ultimaker, the primary materials that they're being printed in are PLA, which is polylactic acid. So it's a derivative of bamboo shoots, completely natural, it biodegrades in less than a year. So most of the hobbyist printers are now starting to be, the materials that they're using are completely eco-friendly. And one of the things that we see more of, and Roger and myself are actually over in Germany at a conference called Form Next, which will show off a lot of the newer technologies in this space. We're seeing more companies that are coming into the market that are completely addressing this. So if we have a model that's being made of a specific polymer that can't be degraded but can be recycled, we're seeing these companies coming to the fore where you can put the models into grinders and they can be melted back down into materials that can be 3D printed again. So it's that full life cycle, the same way you'll have aluminium cans where the cans will be drunk, they're crushed and then redeployed into the market in either cans again or some other form factor. It's the exact same thing for these 3D printed models that are coming into the market now, where they can be ground down and melted down and then reformed into new materials. And the other aspect of 3D printing, which is quite important and not related to the material side, is the cost reduction and the environmental reduction on printing single parts that are for a specific use, as opposed to mass producing things. So in our world, that's knee implants, hip implants, where a hip implant you might need to get replaced every 10-15 years. If we make a patient-specific hip implant, that hip implant will last a lifetime. So there's less materials that need to be used in that specific surgery in that patient's lifetime. And the more we can make patient-specific, the less actual models will actually need to be made, therefore less environmental impact.
Thanks.
Yep. What I'd add to that, Dan, is also, and then it's another slight dimension of sustainability, that patient, instead of needing to have their hip revised after 10 years, when the quality of the performance of the previous one has got to the point where it's so sore, and they've been able to function less as a member of society because they're less mobile, or they've had to take more time off work. If I've got a hip replacement that actually will last for life, then I think there's a very positive argument there as well. The bit I would maybe just to pick up then, Laura, on the question of availability, and maybe not in third world countries as opposed to first world countries. And I think we have some interesting story here. The first thing I would say is, if I look at medical 2D imaging, for non-medical professionals, I would argue, whether I'm in Beverly Hills or in Central Africa, it's totally inaccessible. First of all, physically, the systems that manage medical 2D images are located at a hospital. So if I want to understand or see, I've got to leave work, or I've got to travel, which may be easier or harder to go. I'm reserved in the time I can look at that image with my physician. But actually, when my physician shows me that image, and I've had too many, as a layperson, I've had many orthopedic trauma injuries in my youth. I've had 2 children. And when the surgeon says, Roger, as you can clearly see, I will own up, I can't see anything. I look at this image and I have absolutely no idea what they're talking about. So this information is not accessible, and they are educating me so that I give informed consent to that procedure. I've absolutely no idea what they're talking about. But of course, I'm a bright guy and I nod and go, okay, I see exactly what you mean. That's not accessible, even if I can physically travel to that. If I send you, Laura, a 3D image of a part of your anatomy that's been traumatized, it's so precise, even without a surgeon walking through with it, you will understand, or have a very good chance of understanding what's wrong with you. So first of all, this digitized 3D will be, whether it be printed or whether it be electronic. We did a study with Barts of London where 98% of patients felt more able to do an informed consent but of 3D compared to 2D. That's the scale of improvement. The second point is, and I will defend my friends at the cloud vendors, their technology makes this available to anyone with a mobile device. And thank goodness, in large parts of, if we use Central Africa, they're with their telephone networks.
For the happiness of hackers.
Absolutely. Well, that is a slightly different point, but the availability for me to look at a 3D image.
No, I do get your point. Certainly there are positive points. Certainly, if we think of countries like Africa, I mean, Kenya was the first country to have a mobile payment system in the world. So I strongly believe that not having bad habits make you much more open to innovation. So maybe there will be those who will benefit before others. Okay, now we have just 14 minutes, and I would love you to spend some words on skills needed. So you are pitching a word that will change completely, not only your industry, but also how others will benefit of what your industry is producing. So how easy it is to implement 3D printing production into other industry, and how will be this impacting the skills there? And second point, what are the skills needed to enter into this industry that is so new, and in the next, let's say 20 years, will probably revolutionize a lot of industries. So we are all about skills that matter, right? So I would love you to say a couple of words of what we should expect to work on in terms of skills, and where is eventually the shortage.
Yep. Dan, I'll pass you in a minute, but let me just give you one overarching thought. Maybe you could be very specific to medical 3D printing. I believe the key to scaling, whether it be in medicine or in many of the other industries where 3D printing will mainstream over the next years, is automation. And we are going to have to rely on technologies like artificial intelligence, machine learning, workflow automation to be able to scale. So just because the functionality exists for users to perform these tasks, if we want to scale to where 3D prints are used for 10% of all surgeries worldwide, or for electronic images, 30, 40, 50% of all surgeries worldwide, we can't have humans involved that taking hours to create these images and prints. So I think automation is a key part of my message, and that automation will exist in the printer technology. It will exist absolutely in the application technology. And this is going to be provided by services, cloud-based services potentially, but it's not going to be, there will be early adopters where the individual will be empowered with fantastic CAD software to create these remarkable one-by-one images. But to actually mainstream, my one lens I'm going to give you is we need more and more AI type professionals or process automation. Dan, maybe you could give a more traditional answer to this question.
No, I think Roger, you've hit the nail on the head there with one of the key three things that we were talking about earlier: the software, the hardware, which is the printer, and the materials. Roger's completely right that AI and automation is the only way that this type of technology gets adopted at scale. If we look at the other two sides of that equation, which is the physical printing technology and the materials, in terms of the material side, the key thing is really looking at, as I was saying, most of the technologies that are being used today are plastics or polymers. It's looking at increasing the amount of polymer chemistry engineers that we have out there. It's a very, very niche space, but what we're seeing is more and more of these applications that we've all been talking about today becoming more and more niche, which needs more and more R&D and more research into what specific polymers or resins are going to be needed for these specific applications that are going to be printed. And in terms of the printing technology, it's all to do with the engineering aspects of how you can successfully go from your digital part that's been created by this AI and automation and physically create that. And with that, you need to understand the mechanics of the 3D printer. It's getting back to the golden age of, being able to open a hood of a car and be able to take an engine apart and put it back together, and that engine will start. Those mechanical engineers that are running those printers need to know them inside out. They need to know the print heads, how they work. They need to know that right back down to the sort of chemistry level of, how are the resins being sprayed out of those, so that they can understand how those machines can be maintained and worked. And look, the key thing about that is making sure that the printing technology is repeatable. And if you have really, really skilled engineers, you can start to get these printing technologies printing at 100% efficiency, which is really where we need to get this to, when the software element, which is the portion that will automate it and scale the market, we need the actual physical printing technology to be able to keep up.
Let me understand, you started from what? From a medical background or from a technical background?
Personally, I started from a technical background. So
what is the normal process? Is you see the need and you find the tech, or you are the tech and you find the need?
That's a really good question. It really all stems from a need here, Laura, and the need goes back to some of the things that Roger was talking about earlier, which is we live in a world where medicine is based in a two-dimensional world. Like that is how surgeons and radiologists ingest information about our bodies. It's all 2D. If we look at ourselves, we're made of amorphous, oddly shaped three-dimensional structures. So looking at that in 2D is really, really hard, and especially when you're looking at a congenital deformity or something really complex, you need to take that 2D world and make it into a 3D world. And that's really where the need for Axial 3D came about. And that all stemmed from research that I was doing over at the University of Glasgow, and looking at how you take those complex two-dimensional images and turn them into three-dimensional images that are easier to understand. So I really started the company with that problem. So looking at 2D images is hard. We need to make those in the 3D, easy to understand images that are going to improve medicine.
Laura, maybe as we're getting towards the end here, maybe just to augment a point on that and to show the dramatic effect. If you think at the most, I'm not even talking about implants or growing tissue or any of those amazing technologies. At its most basic, making 3D models available for surgeons instead of relying on 2D for complex surgery. In 50% of cases, the surgeon changes their plan for surgery. 50% of the time, the surgeon, just by having the physical 3D, changes their plan. On average, the resulting surgery takes 62 minutes less. On average, the surgery takes 62 minutes less. On average, the patient leaves hospital 18% faster than where the surgery was planned using 2D imaging. That is why is the outcome that Dan's talking about here. So whether you're coming at this from the medicine point of view, from the engineering mechanics of the printer, or the amazing biological or pharmaceutical, or wrong word, of the compound of the different materials, it all comes together as to hiding behind this rationale of why and what's the compelling case and what's going to mainstream this technology, what is the business or the functional need. And those are the startling numbers, and those are published studies in British Medical Journal or the Lancet. They're not small studies.
I've got one more question that needs to be answered. Do you see standards and regulation that may pose any kind of frame to the industry, or do you see eventually something coming that could enable the industry? And then we have a couple of other questions from the chat. We will probably make it a little bit longer, please.
Yeah, let me answer the first one quickly, and then we can move to other questions. In healthcare, things don't move quickly because regulation is a very important part of this. So especially where we're putting any device into a patient or against a patient or being used, we've got to do the efficacy, safety has to be tested and tested and tested. And we've all watched this with we've all become experts at this cycle with the vaccines and COVID. So we've seen the types of cycles. There is regulation. The FDA in many cases have the gold standard. So, but Europe, other parts of the world, we all have our own regulators, and that is a necessary part of this adoption cycle. And there's nothing about 3D medical printing that will accelerate or slow down that cycle. It just takes that time.
Good, thank you. So let's move to a couple of other questions from the audience. Are there photocatalyzed bio-based resins, not toxic, biodegradable, recyclable, compostable?
So I think I can take portions of that one in terms of the photocatalyzed resins. I'm not 100% sure in terms of the biocompatible or the compostable resins. That it definitely goes back to the polylactic acid filament that I was talking about earlier on. It's completely biodegradable, planet safe, and that is all made from sustainable materials and bamboo.
Thank you. I hope Chris is satisfied. Otherwise, please say your word. Do you have any case study that can share the further expand? Okay. We don't have time. It's a fascinating conversation. I will ask Dan and Roger to come back again. I think we have enough. Can we talk about 3D printing in combination? Well, this is something we have already answered. Well, your last thought. So we have another few minutes. Your last thought for those who want to be involved into the industry. And what is your next step towards making these dreams possible?
Yeah, I think one of the great things for me, if you want from a user point of view as opposed to a supplier point of view, I think the opportunity, the word was used at the start and probably hasn't been used so much since, but the ability of 3D printing, one of the great values is flexibility to prototype. So actually trying to answer the questions, could it be used for this? What if? And in our context of healthcare, there are so many possible applications. I'm sure every week we talk to surgeons who say, could I use it for this? Could I try it for this? Even during COVID, we used 3D printing to connect endoscopes to iPhones so the iPhones could be used in a COVID ward where I didn't go to the patient. There were so many applications, and those are all through rapid prototyping. So I think having that question and saying, what if, could it be used, would be is a great way to engage. And by definition, the industry of suppliers is actually aligned to answer that question. It's not a mass production industry that you'd find in a Coca-Cola factory or something. It is by definition, the mainstream application is a rapid prototyping one. So I think that's a great way of engaging.
Thank you. Dan, your last words, not forever, just for today.
Yeah, I think going back to your point on where we see ourselves going, it's really getting into the patient match devices. So moving away from the patient specific planning models of, how can I better understand how to treat that patient, and start to get into the actual treatments for that patient, and moving closer and closer into actually implanting patient-specific instrumentation into the body. That's really where us as a company, we are going, and where the whole 3D printing industry is going.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Dan and Roger. It was really a very complicated to start, but successful conversation. I love that. We will soon have the recording. I invite everyone to follow these two fantastic guys, and I hope to have you back again, telling maybe in 1 year time what is the progress and where the industry is going. And thank you very much again, and see you next time.
Yep. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Bye.